Hi, I'm Ainsley Ogden, and we're here at the 2013 Canadian Science Policy Conference. We just came out of a session under the Graduate Studies and Research Training theme. The title of the session was Training the Next Generation of Scientists. Who are they and what will they do? One of our panelists was Dr. Ben Neel. Ben is is the Director of Research with the Princess Margaret Cancer Centre here in Toronto. And Ben, you brought a bit of a contrarian perspective to the discussion, sort of some tough love. What do you think, I guess the focus of the session was about postdocs and the status of postdocs research in Canada, and it's on the heels of 3 reports that have just come out, 2 in the States and 1 in Canada, describing the state of postdoctoral researcher and the state of satisfaction. How would you characterize the state of postdoctoral research in Canada?
Well, I think the postdoctoral research is generally quite good. It's certainly just as good as any of the research. At least at the top institutions in Canada, the postdoctoral research is as good as the top institutions in the U.S. And I can say that from the vantage point of having been a faculty member at Harvard up to the level of a chair professor for over 20 years. So I think that the quality of research is good. I think that one of the big problems, though, is that people are waiting too long to start graduate school, taking too long to get their PhD, and then spending too much time in a postdoc, often with no prospects of actually getting an academic job and no real plan for what they're going to do afterwards.
So one of the points that you made was when you did your postdoctoral studies, the average postdoctoral candidate was quite different than what they are today. What's the difference between when you studied and people today?
Well, I can start with maybe trying to recapitulate what the survey says about the average postdoc today. The average postdoc in Canada today is 34 years old. They are either married or in a common law relationship, and a third of them have a child. Mm-hmm. So, the average postdoc when I was a postdoc, and I was actually a little older than the average postdoc because I had done graduate school, medical school, and internship and residency. So the average postdoc then was probably 24, 25, 26 max.
Yeah.
And everybody was out by the time they were 31, 32 if they were going to get an academic job. If not, they'd go to industry or something else.
Yeah. And so how does one of the findings of the survey was postdocs are feeling that they're underpaid for the quality and the necessity that they provide to the research pipeline in Canada. How does payment compare today to back?
So I think that entire issue also mixes in or is combined with the issue of what is the purpose of a postdoc. I mean, I think that I don't view postdocs as employees. I view them as trainees. They're advancing their training. They're called postdoctoral researchers. Mm-hmm. That's what their job is. To basically get additional training that's necessary either to become an independent investigator in academia or industry, or possibly to then leave and do something else. So, I mean, obviously the crux of the issue is whether they should be considered as employees or trainees, and I think that employee trainees, just like residents and fellows in medicine are trainees.
Yeah.
In terms of what the payment was, I mean, I did some calculations of the inflation rate multiplier for what my postdoctoral fellowship was, and there may be there's definitely a little bit of underpayment on the CIHR fellowship scale, $40,000, maybe it should be more like $45,000, $46,000, but it's not dramatically underpaid.
Yeah.
At least by historical standards. I mean, I'm sure that we thought we were underpaid too, but we viewed it as part of the training. Yeah. And the other thing is, I just have to add is that anyone who has done a postdoc has gone to graduate school here, which is almost certainly been paid for by the citizens of Canada. They've also gotten highly subsidized undergraduate training that paid for by the taxpayers of Canada. And then they're almost always being, paid a stipend to get further training to advance their professional standing, again, by the taxpayers of Canada generally. So they're in they've actually gotten a lot from the people of Canada. And I think it's a little bit, unseemly for them to be, thinking they should get more.
So this as well comes from your experience of having been a professor at Harvard University in the States for 20 years. How does the culture differ in Canada to the States?
There too.
Yeah.
I think that this is actually not a U.S.-Canada issue in general.
Okay.
I think that I will say though that there are some really fundamental differences between the system in the U.S. and here. I mean, if you go to undergraduate school in the U.S., even if you go to a state university, a finance state university, which would be the equivalent of a Canadian university, you're going to be looking at $20,000 a year of tuition, maybe 30. Okay, if you go to a private university, you're looking at $60,000 a year. So, you could come out of, university with a debt of $240,000 in a private university, or about half that if you're in a public university. So that's something you're going to have to pay back. No Canadian has that kind of debt ever. And plus, the other thing that's different in the U.S. and here is that there's no health insurance. Okay, notwithstanding Obamacare, there just isn't any health insurance. You have to pay for your health care. So, I think that the situation is actually better for Canadian postdocs because of the social welfare net here.
Yeah, okay. So if you had some advice for a postdoctoral student negotiating a position, what advice would you give them in terms of whether they should pursue it, and if they do, what they should be looking for?
Well, I would start a little differently. I think my first advice for postdocs is to really consider carefully whether they want to do one, and what their goals are, and what they're willing to do, and mixed in with that, or admixed with that, is what they're willing to do to get to what they want to do. Okay, you have to be, in order to be successful in academia. One of my colleagues yesterday, in the context of discussing this presentation with him, he mentioned to me something that is really true, which is, being an academician is not a career, it's a lifestyle, and you have to be willing to make that choice and really stick to it. And it's not for everybody. I mean, I would not, I don't advise anyone to do this job, okay, who isn't really passionate about it, because it's too hard. And, everybody who's a postdoc, is smart enough to do many other jobs. I mean, I could have just used my MD and been a doctor, and I would have a much easier life and probably a more remunerative one. Okay, but, I just can't, to me, you're doing it because of passion. Because this is what you have to do, not because you want to do it.
Yeah.
So, that would be my first advice, is really be sure that you're in the right business. And then the second piece of advice I would have is, really pay attention to where you do your postdoc. Be in control of your destiny. I find so many young graduate students and postdocs have what I call the pebbles in the stream phenotype. They sort of feel like their life is being decided like they're a pebble in the stream, buffeted about by the winds of fate. I mean, you have to take control of your own life and make your own opportunities.
Some words of wisdom. Thank you, Dr. Neel. And this is coming from you from the Canadian Science Policy Conference 2013. Thank you.